Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Toronto Spirit Society. Good morning for you all who are here with us. There's a beautiful day out there, and yet you made a choice to be here. So thank you very much, because it always brightens our day when we get together to think of ourselves as immortal spirits, right? And also thank you everyone who is watching us through YouTube or Facebook. We hope you enjoy our meeting today and ask questions. Our medium, or digital medium, Carlos, is there ready to get your comments and questions. And today, the lecture is from our brother Marco Magalhaes, The Universe and God. Such a very important topic that can be quite complex and daunting for many people. And today we'll all learn a bit with Marco. But before we get started, I would like to invite our dear Olivia to come for the initial reading. Then our brother Fabio will come for the prayer, and we'll pass it on to Marco Magalhaes. After the lecture, we do have our passes, and then a few announcements about the upcoming events and the activities of the TSS. And if after all that you still have questions, you would like to talk to one of the volunteers, you can talk to us, Marcio, Marco, or stick around and we'll talk to you. Okay? Livia?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So the initial reading is from the book Happy Life by Divaldo Pereira Franco and Joana Genesis. Be wise, invest in your future. What is happening to you now is the result of a past that you can do nothing about. But what is to come depends on what you do starting today. While you reap the effects of past actions, your present actions have future consequences. You are destined for goodness. How to get there is your choice through quick or delayed action and setback. Invest in tomorrow and you will be in a happy beginning today.
Dear God, Master Jesus, and our spiritual friends that are here today, that comes with us, help us to open our hearts, help us to enlighten, and to give us a little bit of hope on this day. May the lessons given here will find a place in our hearts and our souls, and that we can have them with us when we leave those doors and carrying them with us. May God enlighten our friend Marco in his presentation today. And may all of us enjoy this day so far.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's great to be here. Today we're going to be talking about such an incredible topic, which is universe and God, which are probably the two things that humanity has been struggling to understand since the very, very early steps of our existence, right? Because they are difficult to comprehend, right? They're very complex, and even the spirits are going to tell us in the Spirit's book that a lot of the topics that we're discussing here, our intelligence right now is not able to grasp completely. So if you feel that this is a daunting task and you feel completely lost, that's okay, right? We're all in the same boat, okay? So what I'm going to try to do today is bring you some supporting evidence, right? So we can get our conclusions a little bit better, so we can understand a little bit more of some of the concepts about God. What is God, right? And in the universe. Right? So I'm going to start with a passage, and I think that illustrates well what we're going to talk about today. This passage was brought to us by the Spirit Mei through the mediumship of Chico Xavier. And the book is called Our Father. The book, or Nosso Pai in Portuguese, is designed to study God in a language that can be used, for example, for kids, adolescents, and for adults. So it brings us like short stories to let us understand a lot about very difficult topics, right? That sounds very much like what Jesus did to us, right? Because when Jesus was here, when he incarnated with us, instead of going to the very details of physics and mechanics and quantum energy and things that we had no idea would ever existed, he simply used us parables to explain concepts that we could grasp, right? So the story goes like this. One day, an older gentleman was sitting outside praying with fervor, like praying literally connected to God. Right? And he was doing that outside when someone approached him. It was actually someone who he worked for this person, so he approached him and said, why are you praying with such amount of energy? Like, what are you doing? Right? He said, well, I'm praying. I'm actually giving thanks to God. And then he said, well, so how do you know that even God exists? Like, why are you doing this, right? And then he starts a very, very simple, humble individual, right? All he was doing is praying. He starts explaining, and he was illiterate, and he couldn't even write or read, but he starts explaining, right? And he asks, well, when someone sends you a letter, how do you know that the person who's signing the letter really is that person who's saying that, is writing the letter? And then the wise man at that time will say, well, I know it by the handwriting, I know it by the content of the letter, right? It's like, great. So when you look at a jewel, right, how do you know that the jeweler that sold or created that jewel is the right person, that actually that jewel is coming from that individual? And then he thinks for a second and say, well, we look at the marks of the jeweler that he leaves on the jewel, so we know that's his fingerprint, right? So we know that's coming from that person. Well, so if an animal comes by our tent tonight, how do you know which animal was this animal was kind of wandering around our tent? The wise man will stop again and say, well, I look at the footprints of that animal, and I can tell, based on the footprint, which type of animal was walking. And then the illiterate man said, well, so you already answered your question. And then the wise man couldn't understand. And he said, look at the sky. Look at the stars. What is that? What is the creator of that? How do you recognize the fingerprint of the creator of that? Right? Look above. Can you tell us who created this? Right? And then the wise man finally realized that there's, just by the fact that parts of creation cannot be explained by humanity, there certainly has to be something out there, right, that is responsible for the creation. Right? So that is the concept of God. Okay? So just as an illustration, how do we get into this topic? So now, we've came a long way, as we understand the history of humanity, which is not that long, like several thousand years. Science has now gave us a glimpse of an understanding of a lot of things, right? So we know, for example, have understanding of how the universe was formed, right? We have theories to explain at least part of it, right? So we'll have the Big Bang Theory. We're going to talk a little bit about it. We know the stars, how they're evolving, they're separated from each other, how they emit energies, and we understand a lot of that, right? We also understand, for example, how us as human beings have evolved, right? Our physical bodies, at least. But science only looks at one side of this perspective, right? Which is the material perspective. Okay? But at the same time, we have a hard time understanding the spiritual perspective of things, right? And these are the two perspectives of evolution and of the creation, right? Because we can look at matter only, but we're going to be incomplete, right? So we have to look at the spiritual side, and we have to look at the material side. And the spiritual side is brought to us primarily by collection of knowledge that's been building for thousands of years, but that's been excelled to us and given to us with a lot of depth by Spiritism, in a lot of the books and the concepts that are brought by Spiritism, right? So one, for example, just to start, the very first book by Allan Kardec, the Spiritist book, which you guys know, have a new movie now about based on the story of the life of Allan Kardec, and it's a beautiful movie. Eventually, we'll get it here, right? But the first question in the book is, what is God? Just to show you that this is one of the most challenging questions that we can possibly ask, right? Because our minds still cannot picture something so complex, right? It's very difficult to understand. So the spirits are going to answer to us this. So God is the supreme intelligence, first cause of all things. So that's an interesting thing, because remember when the wise man was told to look at the sky and look at the stars, and just based on that fingerprint, right, they could picture the Creator, right? So the spirits are telling us something very similar, right? He's telling us that God is the first cause of all things, because for everything, for us, every cause there's an effect, right? So if we see the effect, if we see the creation, there has to be a cause, and the cause is God. So now, this is interesting too, because we're not asking who is God, right? And the reason why that's important, because for thousands and thousands of years, we've been associating God with a humanoid figure or some type of material figure, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's part of evolution, right? So imagine if we're all here a few 100,000 years ago, gathered around, outside, because we didn't have much of a construction or housing anyway, living in caves probably, or something similar to that. And we look at the sky and we see the moon shining at us, right? So in a basic perspective of life, we understand that I cannot create the moon, right? So therefore, that's not my creation, right? The moon shines light on everyone, so it's a kind of a powerful thing, right? It's unique, right? So these are characteristics of, in general, of something extraordinary, something above us, right? So we would refer to that celestial entity, right, a body, as a god or goddesses, right? Same for the sun, right? I cannot create it. It has a lot of energy on it, right? It shines on everyone. It's all powerful. That's the perspective we had. So that's why in the beginning we looked at the sun and we said, well, sun is actually some type of goddesses, right? Or some type of god-like structure or figure. And we started to learn more about it, right? So eventually we realized that, Earth was spinning, the sun, Earth was spinning around the sun and it's spinning around itself, and that's why we saw sun and moon alternating. So we started learning those things. So we started bringing the figure of God from an object to something more humanoid, because now we started to learn, so we use our own intelligence. So we thought we were the super powerful beings of the universe. And then the universe was spinning around us, right? So we transferred that knowledge into our own egocentric view of the universe, and therefore, if there is a God, God has to look like me. See how we shifted things around, right? And that view is still present today, right? Because if you ask around, and if you're asking someone what is the kind of representation of God, well, some people use abstract representations of it, but others will say, well, some type of wise old man, right? That is how we represent that, because we're seen as part of who we are, right? And because of that, we always refer to God as a male figure, right? Which does not make any sense, right? God is the creator of every single thing in the universe. How can you identify sex and gender, right? That does not make any sense, right? So the next question in the Spiritist book is another very important question. So question number 4 of the Spiritist book is this: what proof we have of the existence of God? Now, the answer is the axiom which you apply to all scientific research. There's no effect without a cause. Search for the cause of whatever is not the work of man, and reason will furnish the answer to your question. Right? So for every effect, there's a cause, right? Now, this is something that we may understand a lot better today, but if we go back a few thousand years ago again, right? So we would take literally the words that are contained in the Gospels, right, in the Old Testament particularly, and previous books before that, and we'll take literally the creation was like a snapping finger of God basically, and everything came apart in about 7 days or something like that, right? That obviously is a very metaphorical way of explaining to us something that we could not understand at that time, right? And it's quite clear. But if you take that literally, then scientific reasoning will question it, and quite appropriately will disprove it, right? And that's why this eternal questions about science versus religion was born, right? That was born as part of the literal interpretation of stories that were designed to let us learn, but not taken literally, right? Not out of context, okay? So, God is the creator, and we know that because we are the effects, right? That's who we are, of that creator. And I know I cannot create myself, right? That doesn't work that way, right? Even if I clone myself, science can do that, right? That individual is not me, because there's another spirit in there. The body may be the same genetically. But now we even know in science that genetically identical individuals are different at genetic level because they're post-somatic transformations of the gene. So the gene can shut down expressions and improve, start expression of another set of genes. Even though the original genome is exactly the same, the end result is different. Identical twins are never identical, right? They're always post-translational modifications of the genome. So just to prove us one more time that the idea that we have that, spirits are inhabiting and modifying the body as they feel, right? Because we are actually part of the creation, right? Now, so before we get too complicated on scientific aspects and genetics and the translational modifications and that, let's go back to the basics, right? So, let us all think right now. Let's all use our imagination and construct an image of creation. Okay, let's do that. Let's just, whenever you do that, so we're exercising one of the only moments we have in our existence where you are really free, especially when you think. Okay, so we're free to think. We can't really control our thoughts that much, right? Because the thoughts are actually representing who we are, right? You want to know who you really are? Look at what you're thinking, right? Not what you're doing. Because what you're doing is a combination of a lot of layers that you build up so you can live in society and be friends with a lot of people, right? And engage in a relationship with the society. But who you really are is like much, much deeper inside and is manifesting through your thoughts in general. So you can have a window, like a peek through the window of who you really are. But when you're thinking, you are creating, right? Because Andrea Louise has explained to us many times that every time you imagine something, you create something in your thought, you actually create it around you. It's visible, it's real matter, right? So you can look at it from the spiritualist perspective. If someone's looking at us here spiritually, they can see each one of us, who we really are, because we're emanating those images around us all the time. Now, if we know now that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of everything, so if God thinks, He's creating. He creating, right? So if God is creating, so we are immersed in that creation. So we are immersed in the creative thoughts of God, right? That's a basic principle. We can do that, right? So if we can do that, certainly God can create the entire universe by using a very simple principle of creation, right? Using the end, modifying the energy of the universe based on his own, her own thoughts, right? So God is the creator, and we are now immersed in that creation. So we are part of it, right? But we were giving something super special, okay? We were giving something, right, when we are created, we're given the ability of co-create or participate in the creation. So every time I'm working to help someone, or I'm bringing another spirit into life as a kid, or I'm modifying parts of the creation. I'm actually physically, actively participating in creation. So if we all work together for the goodness of all, we are excelling, we are expediting the process of evolution for everyone, right? So we are co-creators, right? Immersed into God. Now we have to be very careful. God's creation is not God himself, right? And that's an example. So let's say, see Daniel is painting the back there. So if I'm doing some artwork, right? Am I the artwork? Is actually the artwork, is it myself or is it my creation? There you go. So if you think about that, so we can clearly understand that pantheism, or the idea that God is contained in the creation, is really flawed, right? Because if I'm the creator, I cannot be my own creation, right? So I'm separate from it. I'm immersed on it based on my thoughts and the energy that I distribute to it, but I'm not the same thing, right? So we are part of the creation, okay? But we can see the creator on everything. We can see the creator in the perfection, right? When we look at nature and the universe and the laws, we can actually, and that's the initial story that I told you, right? When you look at the skies, you see the fingerprint of perfection. So that is God. Okay? All right. So let us take a step back here now and try to explain what is God, right? Because remember that was the first question in the Spirit's book. It's probably one of the first questions that humanity ever came up with, right? So water, what is around us, right? What is the creation? So the Spirits are going to tell us that we don't have really words or vocabulary or really any type of rational way of understanding God, because that's where we are in the scale of evolution. So the more we evolve morally, right, we're able to free our thoughts and our minds, and we're able to closer and closer understand what is God, okay? But the level where we are right now, we can understand concepts of what God is, not exactly what is God. So God is so perfect, right? Because perfect for us nowadays, it's like looking at a painting from a great artist. We say, well, that's a perfect painting, right? That's how we see perfection and beauty of things. Perfection in the concept of God is not a physical, beautiful thing, right? That's where we're thinking right now. Is a completely comprehensive, abstract thing that I cannot understand. None of us can, right? But we can tell a few things about God, right? So, for example, God is eternal, right? Because if God had a beginning, then someone created God, right? So that's a concept we can get. Okay? So either God would have had sprung from nothing, right? Or he's been created by something that existed previously. So God was not created. Right? So that's why we call God eternal. Right? You guys got that, right? So God is immutable. So we cannot change. Because he's perfect. Because if he's changing, it means that the original form of it was not perfect. Right? You follow that? So see, we can understand a little bit about God based on basic concepts about it, right? God is immaterial. Because if God is material, he was part of his own creation, right? He created every material thing in the universe, right? So he cannot be part of his own creation, right? So it differs from, so the Spirits are going to tell us this. So God's nature differs from everything we call matter. It's not matter, right? Otherwise, he will not be immutable, because every matter is mutable, right? We can change matter, right? He will be subject to transformation of time, which that is not possible. And technically there will be several gods then, right? Because if it's a material thing, so technically anything material could be some type of goddess, right? All right, so immutable, immaterial, eternal. So the next one is God is all-powerful because he's one. Because if you had two gods, right, with equivalent powers, so two things, one would have created the other one, right? So there was something more powerful or least powerful than the other, right? So there will be more not equivalent in the universe. So God might not have created all things, because one God would have created something, the other God would. So everything starts to fall apart if you think that way, right? And then you'd have the idea, the questionable of if God is supremely just and good, and it's perfect, then if you had two of them, there's always the question as well, but one is not perfect, the other one's more perfect than the other, more powerful than the other. That creates unnecessary unbalance in the universe, right? So the universe would not be immutable, okay? So God is supremely just and good, right? And that we can understand, right? Because we all have goodness inside of us, right? So in a scale of things, right? If I have good inside of me, there has to be something on the top of that ladder who is supremely good, right? And that's our Creator. We can understand scales quite well because we judge people that way, right? That's how we do, right? Right, Martha? So we look at someone like, oh, that guy's better than the other one, is better, faster, or works harder, faster. We're always comparing things, right? So if you try to do that in a scale to perfection, then it's easy to understand what God is, right? If I love my kid a little bit or a lot, I know that there's someone who's going to be more than that, and more, and then God is going to be the utmost supreme love, right? So there's always a scale, okay? The same way, there are other individuals who have not found love like we do yet, and they're lacking love, right? But they will come up in that ladder eventually, right? So we can understand it that way. So all of this that we're discussing is in Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, okay? Now, if you think it that way, so can humans now, and that's a question now from Spirit's book number 17. So can humans know the origin of things? So can we understand the origin of everything, right? And I'm giving you the Spiritist perspective, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about science afterwards, okay? The Spirits are going to tell us, no, on Earth, God does not allow everything to be revealed to them yet. And then we may think, because we do that, right? Oh, that's so unfair. Why can't I just know everything about the universe, right? That sounds exactly like my kids, right? When they want to do everything, they want to watch anything, they want to do anything they want, because that's exactly how they feel they're prepared for, right? But they're not. So if I can understand that a kid may not know or do everything at specifically time points in their life, if you change that scale to God, then you understand why we are not ready yet to know that. Because with knowledge comes responsibility. So what the Spirits are telling me is you're not yet responsible enough to handle all that information, right? I can guarantee you that instead of learning from it, that's what you're saying, you're probably going to misuse it, right? And we know, particularly nowadays, when you look at how information is misused through social medias, to hacking attacks and campaigns and politics. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? So see how powerful information is and how easily it can be misused. Okay? Because we need responsibility. Okay? So that's what the Spirits are going to tell us. And then the next question, number 19, is that can't humans grasp some of nature's secrets through scientific investigation? This is a fundamental question. Okay? And particularly because of my own training in science and Spiritism, right? That's something that I've been questioning since very, very young age, right? So looking at science and religion and philosophy at the same time and trying to put it together, eventually we'll quickly realize that they're all talking about the same thing, right? But society in general still doesn't get that idea. But then the Spirits are going to answer. Science has been given to us for the advancement in all matters, but they cannot go beyond the limits set by God. So God created science. So when people ask me, Marco, people trying to genetically manipulate things, that's against God. Listen, God is perfect. Nothing is created unless God allowed it to be created, because then God wouldn't be perfect, right? So if we're stepping into genetic manipulation of things, it means that likely, first of all, God allows that to happen. 1. God created medicine. 2. For our own development and learning how to help each other. Okay? And 3. It likely we're getting the stage of maturity where that information is allowed for us to work on. Will us mess it up big time before we get it right? 100%. Okay, that's exactly what we do because we learn it that way, right? Same thing, if you go back about 50, 60 years ago, not too long ago, when nuclear fusion energy was first created in the lab, right, and it was developed, the energy itself is not bad, right? We learned it. God allows us to learn how to manipulate that. Just like we're allowed to manipulate fire not too long ago, just a few thousand years ago, right? We're able to create fire. How many times we got burned trying to play with fire? Right? Now we still do. Right? We still do. But at least now we somewhat use it on a more regular basis, right? We heat our homes. Isn't that true? Right? We have light everywhere, we have all sorts of things, right? So we use it relatively well in most cases now, right? Except a few, situations, right? But we do it. So now, fusion energy was allowed for us to develop and it was not designed for the intent that we use today, which is threaten killing other people by sending a nuclear bomb in the head of someone, right? That's what we're using. But we also use it for 45% of the energy we're using right now comes from nuclear power plants. If it wasn't for that, then we'll be in a hard time because then we have thermoelectric plants, we could have to divert rivers and tons of rivers and mess up the nature a lot more. So I'm not debating which one is cleaner because there's 50 years of scientific research clashing against each other, trying to decide which one is best, right? And I'm certainly not going to step into that. But at least we know that we can use it. It is a source of energy. Another one will come up at some point. Yes, guaranteed. We're just a little step, right? Eventually, we're going to get to a source of energy which is clean, perfect, and sustainable. Yes, we will. Okay, we're moving along that direction, right? So for us to understand now, our science allow us to get a window into creation. Every day we learn a little thing, right? So for example, we just realized, we proved for the first time that the Higgs Boson exists, which is a particle that is a fragment of an atom that lives inside an atom, right? That likely gives weight to matter, right? So that's why matter, when we feel it, has a weight, it has a structure to it. Because in reality, if I'm a nucleus of an atom, I'm sitting here, the next electron will be running on Dundas Street. Okay? So what is it between it? Nothing? Energy? No, it's the universal cosmic fluid. That's what God created. Okay? That's sitting between all of us all the time. Okay? But for our eyes, it's just an empty space. Right? So technically, matter can be transformed in many, many different ways, right? By attributes that we're starting to learn. So science is actually working. And science is not against God. Science is a tool that we use to learn. People are sometimes rebellious against God. People, not science, right? And you can use science to be rebellious. Just like we can use fire to torch other things, right? That's the same way. So we have to stop this idea that we're going against each other, right? Not at all. When we finally understand exactly what science is and religion is, then we realize that they're actually going side by side, always, because they're both creations of God. Would God, being perfect, create things that technically will be forever against each other? Would God create us to suffer? That's another question. We just learned that God is just, perfect, immutable. So if God is all that, and He creates an individual that's designated that the role of us as individual be to suffer, would God be just? We understand the concept of justice, right? A little bit, right? No. So the suffering that we go through is our own creation, because remember, we are co-creators. We can modify things. The good news is that we can modify it to the good too, so we can make things better. We can improve ourselves, always, right? And we have several incarnations to continue that growth. Okay? So let's continue here. So, in the Spirit book, the Spirits are also going to say that the more humans are allowed to grasp those mysteries, right? The more they should admire the power and wisdom of the Creator. However, whether through pride or weakness, their own minds often render them victims of illusion that they pile theory upon theory. Okay? Every day they see how many errors have and mistakes for truth, and how many truths they have dismissed as errors. Right? These realizations are further blows to their pride. So what they're saying here, science evolves by errors. And, well, not only errors, but, every time you get something right, you may actually disprove something before, which was an error, and then you learn from it, right? So that's how science and the peer review system works, right? We are always keeping an eye on each other. So in science, I publish something, another individual will read that, and he'll try to do the same, right? When a lot of people do the same and repeat it and say, well, this is actually quite real and truth, then it is taken as truth, and then we move on to the next step. But if you follow scientific literature, you soon realize that a lot of things that we're publishing now are quickly being shut down by other people, right? And that's how you control these divergent routes, that there are mistakes. Sometimes it takes many decades to learn. For example, and this is a classical one that we're reviewing now, is the role of fat in our diet, right? For many years, we've been told that fats are bad, period. Don't eat fats, right? It's going to be a disaster, right? Now we're learning that fat may not be the bad thing that maybe sugar is a lot worse than fat, right? And those were based on 2 papers that were published in Science many years ago, right? Now we're kind of learning the contrary, and eventually we'll finally get to the obvious answers that a balanced health and diet is actually perfect for you. It's actually not one thing or another thing or that thing, right? But science will get there, right? And it's like the slow studies. So we're always learning, right? Okay, so let's think about other concepts here. So everything we're talking about, I'm taking mostly from the Spirit's book. But one thing that, when you start studying Spiritism, one trap that we always fall, and I did myself too, is just to realize or to think that what we're learning here in Spiritism is 100% novel. It's only brought to us by Spiritism, and this is perfect. And the reality is, a lot of the information we listen to in Spiritism has been brought to us many, many times before, in many other forms and shapes and sizes. And the reason why it's, well, we're now understanding Spiritism, but we've been exposed to this many times. And that's why sometimes it's easier for us to accept some information. For example, everything that I'm talking about here about God, the creator, right, about God, in the 1200s, so about year 1250, St. Thomas Aquinas, or the Aquino, like if you prefer, have also written exactly the same things we're discussing here. And he is, by far, the greatest philosopher of Catholic Church. And the reason why I bring this, because in Spiritism, we keep going to the trap of looking at others, say, you guys still believe in that, oh, you guys do that, oh, I'm so evolved, right? We're not, right? We're learning like everyone else, and we've taken a road, which information is given to us in a very clear way, and we should be responsible. Remember what comes with information? Responsibility. Not to us to judge anyone, right? Because I'm giving you an example here, where one of the most influential philosophers of the Western world in Catholic Church actually is giving us information 900 years ago that we're now learning through the Spirit's book. Okay? So what is he saying? See, he talks about the arguments of the existence of God. And I really like the arguments, right? So it has 5 arguments. So the first one is it's the unmoved mover. Okay? I'll explain it to you. So, if something's put in motion, right? If something's put in motion, it has to be put in motion by another thing or individual or entity that pushes the first thing in motion. And this first one is not in motion, right? He's the unmoved mover. He's the one that's pushing things around. So if the universe is created that way, so there has to be some form of entity, which we call God, that is given the kickstart motion of the process, right? Very easy to comprehend, right? That's what he brought. So the second argument is the first cause, and that's exactly what Spiritist brought to us, Spiritist book, where for every effect there's a cause, there's a first cause for everything, and therefore that first cause is God, right? I'll just give you a few more examples. For example, the argument from the degrees. That's the scale that we talked about. Remember, the Spiritist keeps talking about how we evolve morally, spiritually, right? And if you think about the scale to perfection, so at the very top of that scale, God will be sitting there because God is perfect, right? And we are all in that little scale. So St. Thomas Aquinas describes the degree. So if we can see a little bit of love here and some love there, there has to be the perfection of love somewhere, and that's God. Okay? And then he continues on with a lot of other examples. And listen, again, what Allan Kardec just discussed in the Spirit's book, this is from St. Thomas Aquinas. This is what he's going to say. God is simple, without parts, body, soul, matter, or form. That's what he said. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? So God is perfect, lacking nothing, right? God is infinite, right? And even the word infinite may not be the perfect translation of it, right? Because infinite means, there's a lot of physical stuff, but we can talk about it later. But God is immutable, right? Because if you want to make a system, think about systems in IT, right? If you want to make an IT system works perfectly, you can't put too many variables that are going to fight with each other, right? So the more variables you put in the system that allows it to keep moving and changing all the time, eventually the whole thing will clash, right? So immutable means there is a source code, there's an essence to the universe that is so perfect that that one does not change, right? Because if it keeps changing, then everything else changes, right? And that's us. And God is one. So that's the summary of St. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. That's exactly what we're talking about today. Okay? Now, stepping a little bit in science now, and I'm not going to take too long now. We know, as a fact, that when our telescopes look around in the universe, we've noticed that there's a pattern of the radiation being emitted by stars, which proves the point that they're separated from each other. That's why we believe, again, think about the scale, right? If things are moving away from each other, it means that eventually they were all in the same spot, right? So that's where the Big Bang Theory was first discussed, right? If things are moving away, eventually, if you move back in time enough, they were all within the same center point in space, okay? And by many fantastic minds were able to calculate that the gravitational forces generated in that spot were so absurdly high, I can't even think how high they are, that was quite explosive, right? Because gravitational forces are really explaining everything about how the physical bodies in the universe relate to each other, okay? So that's why the explosion happened. Now, what is the critical thing about science versus religion now? So science is going to say that, well, gravity explains everything. And I agree. Gravity explains everything about how stars and planets and physical bodies in the universe relate to each other in space and time, right? The question is, who created gravity? Gravity cannot have created itself. And that's one of the interesting ways of you looking at the concepts of God, right? Now, if you think about God as the old man, as we discussed about, then none of what I'm talking about makes any sense, right? But if you cannot really understand what's God, but you know it's perfect, immutable, and you know it's putting in action the creation of the universe, then you start to realize that, well, so if the gravitational forces are perfect, they govern the universe, they're immutable, so there has to be exactly that as a creator of it, right? And that's what we understand in Spiritism. So we're not against anything, okay? And a lot of people in science believe that too, right? So it's not only me, but there are a lot of other people out there that does believe, and some very famous individuals also in science that believes in that too. So we're working together, okay? Now, if you think about So the other concept then is that, well, Marco, you're saying that gravity is explaining, how physical matter and energy are regulated in the universe. So that is created by chance. Okay, so that's the second hypothesis, right? So there's two hypotheses. One is that there's an intelligent creation. The other one is that a chance creation. So if you believe that it's created by chance, this is what it means. Okay, so if I take my laptop here, okay, I take it all apart in every single little piece you can possibly imagine. I put it in a bag. Okay, so I mix this bag around. I throw it to the sky. Okay, and if I do it as many times, like I don't know how many times, but if I do it, eventually, all the parts will fall back to exactly the same position, right? And I have a computer again. So that's the theory of chance. Okay? So if you believe it, that's great, right? So what you're saying is that, well, I believe if we do it enough times, and we have billions of years to do it, eventually I'll do the same experiment, and I'll get one response that the computer will be back again, altogether. Now, that's okay, that's possible. Now, the problem is, will the computer turn on? And I think that's the next step of rational thinking that we have to do, right? Chance can explain a lot of things, right? There's mathematical equations for that, and explains it in a mathematical model, but we know that chance is actually intelligently influenced by all of us, right? By the operator, by the spirit, by God, by the whole universe. So chance in matter does not exist. Everything is influenced by us and by spirit and by the creator, right? So in reality is that the intelligent design will tell us that eventually we're going to throw this little bag to the sky, right, with all these little parts, and by the creative thought of everyone involved, including the creator, all above, we'll direct the pieces to coalesce together and start working again, right? And when I turn on the computer, it will turn on and run my PowerPoint again. Let's go a step further. Okay. And we even add a few words that I missed. Correct my typos. Okay. So that is intelligent creation. All right. And I frankly tell you that not only looking at now, even if I look at my scientific side only, I'll tell you that I believe in it. Even if I discard everything I know in Spiritism. It's just because it's more rational than thinking that just random choices will eventually lead to intelligent creation. So basically, the question is, can intelligent creation be derived only by chance, or you need an intelligent mover, like an intelligent creator, right? And that's what Spiritism believes, right? And that's where we stand, okay? And this story is not actually mine, it's by Gary Schwartz in his book, we're talking about it, okay? All right, so, and I just want to finalize here with, because we talked a little bit about God, the attributes of God. We talked about intelligent creation versus chance, and a little bit about the laws that govern the universe. And important point here is that nothing in Spiritism is against what science tells us about the scientific creation of the universe. Zero, nada, right? Try to find it. Actually, quite the contrary, and I'll give you a few examples. Some books in Spiritism, and a classic one, that's the book I like the most, it's called Evolution in Two Worlds, André Luiz Chico Xavier and Valdo. It brings us concepts that we are only now, this book's like in the 1950s, right? So we're only now learning that actually true, right? So now we're doing the catch up in the reverse. So science is now catching up to some of the knowledge that is contained in Spiritist books, for example, right? And I'll give you some, for example. In the book, he describes, for example, how during the creation, light and heat in the universe, right, the energies in the universe, were under the influence of very, very high spirits. And I know one by name called Jesus, right? So Jesus was part of the creation of our entire galaxy. Even before our planet existed, he was already here manipulating the energies in this area of the universe to allow us to have a home, to incarnate, to grow, and then he would even come back here to give us a little hands-on course, right? A little workshop on how to love. Because we're probably doing not a good job. It's like he came and said, guys, listen, come here, let me show you this. And I'm not going to be here the super enlightened being that I am actually, I'm going to come exactly as you, as in this tiny little physical body, right? And instead of spitting on you all the information I had in my mind, because that would be very bad, right, very mean, I'm actually going to draw in sand so you guys can follow it. Talk about love. That's the love of Jesus, okay? So they explain to us how the creative thinking of this incredibly elevated spirits were able to direct the whole creation of the universe to allow us to be here, for example, right? How the spiritual energy of those individuals can be absorbed in a world that's created and allow us to have a nice psychosomatic place to live, so we're all here and united, for example, as we are like a big family, for example. So they talk about our bodies being a co-creation of us as a spirit, right? And that's now proven by science, right? Because we all know now that we can actually, there are many, many layers of post-translation modifications of the genome that can occur. And now the spirits tell us that it's all influenced by our thoughts, by who we are, right? So we can actually manipulate how we look, okay? And that's true also in health and in disease, okay? Because if we have accumulated some type of disturbing energy in our perispiritual bodies, whenever we get a new clothes, when we come back and put the body back on again, that body now will manifest as a disease what I've been sharing, right? So that's all explained, okay? And just to finalize here, we're just going to read one thing here. So, in science, we have a few individuals which certainly very, very highly elevated spirits that came and propelled our science and our understanding of the universe a lot. And one of those is Albert Einstein. And he wrote, this is an interview he gave in a book from George Sylvester Viereck's. The book's called Glimpses of the Great. It was published in 1930. And this is what he says. The human mind, no matter how highly trained, cannot grasp the universe. Okay? It's not only me saying that. Okay? So I have some backup. Okay? We are in the position of a little child. That sounds very much like Spiritism, anyway, and all of us. Entering a huge library, and I love this example. So I want you guys to picture this, okay? So you're going to this gigantic library. The walls are covered to the ceiling with books in many different tongues, many different languages, okay? The child, right, knows that someone must have written those books, right? Because the books are there. I can see them. Right? They're all different, right? It does not know who or how. It does not understand the languages in those books, because that's exactly what we do. We don't understand the language of creation, because it's a perfect language, right? We have a very good time understanding a lot of bad things, because we're still connected to those, right? But we have a very hard time understanding perfection, because it's still a little bit far away from us, okay? The child does not have a definitive plan in the arrangement of the book. So everything is organized perfectly. Okay? A mysterious order of that universe that you're living. I don't know exactly what's the order, right? But I know there's some type of order. Okay? Which it does not comprehend, but only dimly suspects. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of the human mind, even the greatest and most cultured toward God. We see a universe marvelously arranged, obeying laws, but we understand the laws only a little bit. Right? Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious force that sways the universe. That is God. Okay? Thank you all, guys. That's it.
Any questions from anyone in the room or anyone in the on the web? No questions? I just want to say, I was listening to Marco, right? How often do we stop during our day-to-day to think about God in the universe around us? Rarely, right? Or almost never. right? But so important, right? For two reasons. Those who have kids or plan to have kids or are teachers or have a neighbor who have a kid, one day those kids will come to us and asking those questions. You don't need to answer this, but are we prepared to explain that to them? We want to raise kids that can think for themselves and make good decisions. Are we educating them in a way that they can actually rationalize and understand, or be manipulated, right? Or be accepting things because we say so? And we need to be careful, right, with Spiritism, because if we're not careful, we are accepting things because someone says so, right? And Allan Kardec says very well, right? We should use our intelligence. If God gave us intelligence, it is to be used. It's not a sin to ask questions. So that's the first thing that comes into mind, right? And I police myself a lot with my kids not to repeat that. But it's very important for us to stop and hear this. And the second point, and I think that can relate to everyone here, right? We all have our problems, our challenges, our struggles, our disappointments, our frustrations, right? We all have something that hurts, and it's very easy for us to feel abandoned, hopeless, or feel victimized, and think that God really doesn't look at us, or even more, that there is no such thing as God. Because very often if we stop to talk about God with our co-workers or neighbors, someone from school, they will change the subject immediately. We will be ridiculed to be thinking about such things. And it's very easy for us to live a materialistic life, deepen ourselves in disappointment, frustrations, and mistakes, right? So it's so important that very now and then we listen to this, we think about it, because God is around us, is everywhere. God loves every single one of us. If we are imperfect parents who leave every single one of our children in the same manner, imagine God, who is perfect, right? In understanding God, we can understand why do we suffer. And we could spend another lecture here, right? But it is a fundamental question. I want to thank you for bringing this topic to us. I want to say a few things before I ask again for questions. What Marco read for us is the first part of the Spirit's book, right? And Allan Kardec condensed what is in this full book here called Genesis. We don't have the Spirit's book in our library, but we do have the Genesis, right? And really deepens on everything that Marco said. This is the book that he said, we mentioned about for kids, right? Our Father. I'm not sure if we have there. You may want to check on if you want to buy, but it's very important that we get contact with this. Our study groups on Saturdays, we probably spent over a month talking about God and the influence of God in our lives, right? So very important. I feel that we're blessed to be able to listen to this, but let's keep that alive, right? Let's keep that questioning, that understanding, because it's fundamental for us. With that said, any questions here? Any questions on the web? No? So thank you all for watching us. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Marco, again. We are going to prepare for the PAS system.